Hi, I'm Lance Henriksen. You're watching Brian Lomax's Movie Talk.
In 1985, the second Nightmare on Elm Street film was released in cinemas to a pretty poor reaction from critics. However, the box office numbers were quite decent. It was pretty much agreed all around though that the tone of the film wasn't quite what people wanted. And so with the third film, producer Bob Shaye went back to the source of the first film, Wes Craven, to pen the first draft of the script. The script was later redrafted by director Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont, who would go on to great success with The Shawshank Redemption. Well, I gotta say, it is definitely a vast improvement on the second film. Of that, there is no mistake. This film has a lot more central characters who kind of group together to create this kind of super team, if you like, who then go into the dreams to hunt Freddy and kind of beat him at his own game. This super team is mostly made up of teenagers who are being hunted in their dreams by Freddy Krueger. They don't want to sleep, but as a result they kind of come off as a little bit crazy and at some point suicidal, and so for their own protection they've been locked away in this asylum where some doctors are trying to help them get to grips with their sleeping patterns and their behaviour. One of these doctors just so happens to be Nancy from the first film. That's right, Heather Langencamp is back in the role at the request of Wes Craven. Once again, I think she's adequate in the role. She doesn't particularly blow me away. I know a lot of people have a fondness for this character. I personally think that the actress was hired on the first film mostly out of budgetary constraints, really, than any genuine kind of talent. I think all the subsequent films have clearly had a much better pool of acting talent, and that shows. We get some very early roles from Lawrence Fishburne, who in the credits of this is referred to as Larry Fishburne, and Patricia Arquette, who plays one of the main characters, one of the main teenagers who's suffering at the hands of Freddy Krueger. Both of these actors are very good in their respective roles. Lawrence Fishburne's always good in what he does. He has an easy charm about him that I just find the guy likeable, even when he's playing villains. Patricia Arquette is also really good at playing someone who looks like she's going a little bit insane under the weight of everything she's going through. I like the relationship dynamics between all of the main characters in this film. They feel quite real, more so than previous efforts. We often get kind of stereotypical teenagers in slasher movies, and one thing that I feel this series has done particularly well is not kind of hold to those kind of stereotypes. But I feel the same way about the doctors. We get one guy called Philip, and he's a bit of a flawed character. I think we grow to like him. I grew to like him. But he's not a perfect character. He says some things and does some things that kind of really get my back up against the wall and make me think that you're an idiot. You're not a very nice person. But then he proves me wrong and does something that is nice. And like you can tell this guy is genuinely trying to look after these kids. He's genuinely trying to do the best for them, but he's not equipped to do that because he doesn't have the knowledge of who is actually stalking these kids. There's one point in the film in which he is referring to one of their friends who has been killed by Freddy Krueger. He's been kind of used as a marionette puppet and tossed off a building, but obviously to the outside world it just looks like he's thrown himself off that building. And he tells these kids, he gets into a little bit of an argument with them. He says that this guy killed himself and he took himself out like the coward's way. He actually uses the word coward, and that really got my back up. Because when people say that, it's just a really thoughtless thing to say. As I say, that's the kind of thing that a character like this in a film would say if they were normally going to be the typical douchebag that gets their comeuppance. But he doesn't, because he actually turns out to be a pretty decent guy. As I say, he's genuinely trying to help them. And I liked that about the film. I liked that we have something of a hero who actually has flaws. The film deals with the theme of guilt and how often the children kind of pay the price for their parents' guilt, even though the parents try and dump that guilt onto their children and make them feel like they're the ones who are responsible. This becomes evident in one particular scene where another doctor called Elizabeth Sims kind of brings that to the fore. She essentially says that the things these kids are seeing, this killer, Freddy, is essentially a manifestation of their guilt. It's how they're dealing with their guilt for the kind of things that all teenagers should feel guilty for, such as having sex, premarital sex, and drinking, and all that kind of thing. This is how it manifests itself. But of course, we know that Freddy is actually a manifestation of someone that was killed by their parents. So it's actually the guilt of their parents that is now raining down on their children. So there's some of the positive things I think about this film, but what are some of the negatives? Well, as it seems to be the case with all of these films so far, we're 3 films in, the rules of Freddy and what he can do and where he can do it often seem a little bit hazy. There's a moment in this film when the aforementioned scene I was talking about, in which Freddy uses the guy as a marionette puppet. He takes him out of the hospital and he kind of walks through this door. Now, I understand that he's doing that in the dream, but it was never really made clear that he could do that in real life. So he passes through this door, this locked door. Now, I know we've seen things happen in the real world where Freddy scars someone in the dream and then their body becomes scarred in real life. But it was never really established that you can make people pass through solid objects. I don't know, it feels like at times they do whatever is convenient. The final act of the film, again, is pretty messy. Again, that's something I've found with all of these films so far. The final act, no matter how good the setup might be, gets messy. And that's because we start going into fantastical realms. We start doing things that kind of maybe need a bit more explanation, but we don't get it. There's a scene in which Freddy's corpse is being dug up by Dr. Philip and Nancy's father, and the skeleton comes alive and starts attacking these 2 guys. And it just really doesn't feel explained. The fact of the matter is, if Freddy is able to do that, if he has been able to do that for some time, why not simply get his bones to stand up, walk away, and go and hide somewhere? Or I don't know, go and do something. But it gets up after being lay there for goodness knows how many years, knocks these 2 guys out, and then falls back down. It makes no sense. Another question I have about the character of Philip as well is, when did he become an expert in hypnotism? As far as I'm aware, he's a sleep expert. He's a doctor who works within the field of sleep deprivation and that kind of thing, and psychology. All of a sudden he's just able to do hypnotism. I feel this is something that was kind of predominant in the 80s, this idea of that hypnotism is just something anyone can do. It's just simply a case of waving a little string with a pendant on it and anyone can be a hypnotist. Yeah, that it was an element that just kind of really grated on my nerves. I didn't really feel like it would fit that character. Again, why couldn't they bring someone in? Why, if they knew that's what they needed to do, bring another character in, say, look, here's someone we've brought in to help. Problem fixed. But instead, they give it to this character who I personally don't believe would be able to have those skills. Like I say, it's all about convenience. If they need something to happen in the film, then they find out some kind of convenient way to do it. And if they can't have an explanation about it, well, they just brush on past. Also in the film, we do get a little bit more backstory into Freddy's history, how he was born, how he came into being. And I kind of like it. It fleshes out the idea of how this evil was created to begin with. I think it adds something to the character. It certainly doesn't take anything away. And I think it introduces an element into the film of faith, which kind of gives the film some strength, I think. Gives it something more to discuss, to talk about. To have this kind of spiritual element in which this ghostly apparition of Freddy's mum comes back to kind of give them information that will help them. Ultimately, if you're going to have an evil, a source of evil, then you must have a source of good. You must have something within the spiritual realm that kind of matches that, the yin to its yang, so to speak. So A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 is a pretty decent entry into the franchise, I'd say. It maybe isn't quite as good as the first film, but I'd say that's only by a little margin. It suffers from some of the same problems of the first film, such as lapses in logic and not truly establishing some of the rules. But other than that, it's a pretty decent film, pretty enjoyable film with likeable characters and quite a creative plot, I think. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. So if you've seen this film, please comment below and let me know what you thought about it, and tell me where you think it ranks among the rest of the films in this series. Until next time, thanks for watching.